Hello, my name's Jo Baring. I'm the director of the Ingram collection, and I'm delighted that you are joining me today for this highlights tour of modern and contemporary art from the 2020 edition of Masterpiece. I have chosen 7 highlights from this year's fair, and I've deliberately chosen an array of material and medium. So I've chosen some sculpture, I've chosen one large-scale piece of sculpture, also some smaller pieces which would look lovely in homes, on mantelpieces or tables. I've chosen a painting, a watercolour and pencil on paper, and also a print. So it's just this idea of thinking outside different materials that you might normally look at. The first artist that we're going to be looking at today is someone called Dame Elizabeth Frink. She's a British artist who, when she left art school in the 50s, saw immediate success. The Tate bought her work. It was a bird piece in the early 50s. But in the 60s and 70s, her reputation was slightly eclipsed by those, by pop art and by a very different aesthetic. And in recent years, Frink has actually undergone a critical reassessment. There have been a number of really great museum shows about Frink's work, and also a fantastic show at Houser and Worth at Somerset recently, which really reassessed her. And quite a lot of these shows actually placed her in the context of European modernism. So placing her work alongside artists such as Germaine Richier, Alberto Giacometti, and it's there in that context that her work makes most sense. This is called Horizontal Birdman. It's a 1952 piece. So in terms of subject matter and date, it's exactly what you ought to be looking for with Frink. Imagery of birds, flying, birdmen are really key to her work. She talks about how she was influenced by seeing airmen falling from the sky when she was a child. You know, when she was born and growing up, she experienced real horrors in the Second World War. She grew up next to an air base, and she says that she remembers seeing airmen falling from the sky in flames. And those nightmares stayed with her throughout her whole life. So she's very interested in the imagery of falling men, flying men, birds. And the fact that this is a bird man, it kind of really encompasses all those ideas. So I definitely think Frink is someone that you should be looking at. And also, this is a lovely size. It's perfect domestically. It's with Christopher Kingsit. So I definitely go and have a further look at that one. The second item I've chosen is a painting by someone called Joe Tilson. Joe Tilson, if you don't know him, is actually one of Britain's best known pop artists. And if you like that aesthetic of pop, and are interested in learning more about it, then I definitely look at Tilson's 60s work. There was actually a major retrospective at the Royal Academy of Tilson's work, and particularly his pop work. But this is a 50s piece, and I think it's really, really interesting. So Joe Tilson was at the Royal College of Art. He studied there. And when he was there, he won what's called the Rome Prize. And that enabled him to go to Italy to travel and study. And when he was there, he became really enthralled by the difference in the landscape, you know, and many of us won't be able to travel to Italy this summer, which is a shame, but we all remember those kind of earthy tones, the terracotta, that kind of sense of sand and heat, which we just don't have here in England. And what he's done to kind of really get that feeling of being there, he's not only used the colours, so you can see that there's orange and terracotta to really evoke that kind of dusty heat of the Italian landscape. But I'm not sure if you can actually see it on the video, but maybe if you can sort of look at the image in a bit more detail later on, you'll see that he's actually encompassed the texture of the landscape as well. So he's picked up earth and he's picked up sand and he's mixed it with the paint, and it's all gone in there onto the canvas. That's actually what a lot of artists were doing in the 50s. So it wasn't just about paint on canvas. It's about texture, materiality, and modern art is very much thinking about different ways of painting on canvas and how you can sort of how the viewer can be transported into different places through that use of texture, materiality. Joe Tilson, not just the pop art. I think look also at those 50s works because they're really beautiful. This is with Godson and Coles. The third artist that I have picked is someone called Jack Witten. He is an American artist, born in 1939, and he died a couple of years ago in 2018. And moving on from what Tilson was doing, that investigation in the 50s into materiality and texture on canvas, he really takes that a step further. So he had a 5-decade career. At the beginning, in the 50s, Witten is very influenced by the kind of the gestural abstraction of the American abstract expressionists. But later on, he really puts his own stamp on those paintings. So he's thinking about materiality. He's thinking about the physical application of paint. It's actually quite sculptural what he does. So if you don't know his paintings, he kind of gets these ribbons of paint, so huge, very heavy ribbons, they're very sculptural, and he places them onto the canvas so that you almost get this kind of idea of like a mosaic tile effect. They're incredibly beautiful. And there's been a big, again, a kind of a resurgence of interest in Jack Witten. He's had a couple of really great museum shows recently. There was one in 2018 in Berlin, and then another one in, so that was 2019 in Berlin. And then in 2018, he had a show at the Baltimore Museum of Art. This piece I've picked because it's not what it's not one of those paintings, but it's actually a watercolor and pencil on paper. But I think within that, you can really see those experiments, that investigation. And I think it's really important that you don't just limit yourself to paintings. You also look at an artist's entire output, look at their works on paper, look at the drawings, because I think there's so much beauty. And sometimes in those slightly quieter pieces, you learn a lot more about an artist. This piece is on with Hauser and Wirth. The fourth piece I've picked for you to have a look at is this gorgeous little work by Dame Barbara Hepworth. Hepworth is one of the icons of 20th century modernism. She's incredible in that there are 2 museums named after her. And I actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't think of any other woman artist that has 2 museums dedicated to her. There's the Hepworth Wakefield up in Yorkshire and the Tate-run Barbara Hepworth Museum and Sculpture Garden in St. Ives. You know, when we think about Hepworth, she's such a titan of international sculpture that we might think that you can't get a domestic sized piece anymore. You know, you think of that incredible sculpture in the United Nations Plaza in New York, but here you go, you've got this lovely piece, it's 4.5 inches. And what I love about Hepworth in particular is her constant experiments with material. So even with sculpture, she's experimenting with carving different woods. She's not only looking at bronze, but here she's polished the bronze, which just adds that extra interest to the surface. And I can imagine, if it was in a beautiful home with sunlight reflecting off it, it would light up the whole room. And that's what she's interested in. There are some lovely letters in her archive, where she talks about her interest in material, and she's really specific about those different, even something sort of different wood. She talks about the ability to carve a certain type of wood as opposed to another one. This is on with New Art Centre, who worked with Hepworth when she was alive and also have been working with the estate for many years. And that's one of the things I love about Masterpiece, is that you get these really, really knowledgeable exhibitors who know their work, who know their artists. So please do ask questions, ask as many questions as you want to find out more about the artists and the works. During the lockdown, actually, it was announced that the Tate, very excitingly, are going to open another of her studios to the public. And hopefully that'll be open in the next couple of years, which is incredibly exciting. The next piece I've chosen is by an artist called William Turnbull. Turnbull is best known as being a sculptor, particularly in the 60s. He was really at the forefront of that explosion of modernism, international modernism. And there's that really amazing David Hockney painting called American Collectors. I don't know if you know it, with the 2 American collectors standing in front of their pool with their collection. And there's actually, it's a Turnbull sculpture that they're standing beside. So he really is at the forefront of modernism in the 20th century. But not a lot of people know about his paintings. And I think his paintings are really worth considering. So this is interesting. This is painted in 1957, and he's made it with a palette knife. So again, it's that idea of not just applying paint onto canvas with a brush, but thinking about materiality, about the physical application, about the heaviness of paint, tactility. Again, it's very sculptural. And this was painted when Turnbull had been to see a Monet retrospective, and it was kind of really looking at that idea. Monet later on in life reduced everything down to colour and paint on canvas. So to think that painting could really just be about painting alone, rather than trying to put an image onto a canvas. And this encouraged Turnbull to move away from figuration totally in his paintings and concentrate just on ideas around abstraction. A quick aside about Turnbull is that he was married to a very brilliant artist called Kim Lim. Kim Lim she was born in Singapore. She came over to Britain in the 50s, where she studied at art school and made a fantastic career. She had a retrospective at the Roundhouse in Camden. Recently, there have been a number of museum shows dedicated to her, both in Singapore, internationally, and in the UK. And I know that there's a major retrospective planned for her. So Kim Lim, I don't have an image to show you, but go away and look up Kim Lim, because I really recommend her as an artist to look at and learn more about. Another sculpture I've chosen is by someone called Lynn Chadwick. Now, if you don't know Lynn Chadwick, a fun fact about him was that actually in 1956 at the Venice Biennale, he beat Alberto Giacometti to the International Sculpture Prize. That really cemented his reputation, as it had done for Henry Moore before him. This piece, Teddy Boy and Girl, references that youth subculture that emerged in Britain in the 50s, and where, teenagers really for the first time had their own identity. And if you look closely, you can see that he's depicted the typical dress associated with the Teddy Boy and Girl, the drain-pipe trousers and pleated coats. He won the International Prize for Sculpture at Venice. And then in the 60s, his work was really overshadowed by pop art. But I think he's definitely worth a reassessment. He's worth looking at. A key thing that I do when I look at artists, which I recommend that you do, is to see which museums have them in their permanent collections, because then it shows how much kind of critical appreciation there was for him, how much museum support for artists. It's definitely worth doing. If you look at someone like Chadwick, he's in some really important collections. He's in MoMA in New York, amongst others, and he's also in the Peggy Guggenheim collection in Venice. And again, when you go to, if you've ever been to the Peggy Guggenheim collection, you'll see Chadwick next to Giacometti, next to Germaine Richier, and like Frink, as we talked about right at the beginning. If you place these artists in an international context, they suddenly start to make a lot more sense. So I would definitely look at him. Now, the final work that I have chosen as one of my highlights is by one of my favorite artists, Bridget Riley. She really is one of the best known artists working today, and was the subject recently of a major retrospective up in Scotland, which toured down to the Hayward Gallery in London. The most sought after commercially of Riley's works are the 60s black and white pieces, that kind of so-called op art. In the 60s, in the early 60s, she painted 5 paintings each one called Blaze, the Blaze series. And they were about black and white, about the reduction of visual things to that kind of pure abstraction. And these screen prints are based on Blaze. And actually, the earliest Blaze painting really propelled her into the international scene, international recognition. And there's a really great quote about her ideas about black and white, which I just wanted to read out to you, which is that kind of that idea of Blaze she's interested in capturing the sensations that we experience in nature, such as dazzling sunlight. So she says that she was inspired to make the Blaze paintings because she was looking directly into the sun over a foreshore of rocks exposed by the tide, and that the sun reduced them all to a violent black and white contrast. And I think we can all, we'll remember what that looks like, to look over and be so dazzled that all you can see is the black and white. I think what the Hayward show did for Riley is not just to kind of showcase the importance of her paintings, but also her other works. So her prints, such as here, and also her works on paper, and also the kind of the mathematical experiments that she does in terms of kind of creating the patterns within that, creating those op art patterns. So that's kind of what I've been saying throughout, is don't just look at the paintings by an artist or what they're best known for example, with Turnbull and sculpture. Just be a bit creative and look and think, okay, well, I love the paintings, but maybe I'll have a look at their works on paper and see what those look like, or maybe a drawing or a smaller sculpture, and just kind of really think, be a bit more experimental in what you're thinking about. And I think that masterpiece is great for that, because there's such an array of exhibitors. And also, if you really like a dealer and there's something by an artist that you really like, but they don't have exactly what you're looking for, ask, because most dealers are able to source things for you. This has just been a kind of a snapshot of what's available at Masterpiece this year, and these are just some of the highlights. If I was to do another tour, I could probably pick lots more different highlights for you, but I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please contact Masterpiece directly, and I'm sure I'd be happy to answer them for you. Thank you so much for watching this highlights tour of modern and contemporary art at this year's Masterpiece. Masterpiece are offering unlimited free access to all artworks, conversations and content during this Masterpiece online. If you've enjoyed these curated highlights, please consider donating to the Masterpiece Cultural Fund to support museums in the UK, US and Asia. And you'll find a link to donate beneath this video. Thanks very much for watching.